Mike Muller, head of Vitol in Asia, to give us the front end of the market reality of which one of those realities are we in. A month since we've had you on the show. A month ago, oil prices were knocking their head around 110. A month later, it seems we've been through multiple traumas and we're still knocking our head around 110. What's your thoughts and outlook this early in May?
Yes, thanks, Sean. I'm glad to hear you getting some tennis action there in Spain. Brilliant, with the two top seeds being beaten by the Spanish kid. So great. I mean, 3 or 4 things happened in recent days which have shaped the market to go back above $110 pretty decisively so. One was the EU trying to get some consensus amongst the 27 states for which they require unanimity around shedding the need for any Russian oil at all whatsoever. And checking with various sources around Europe, there does seem to be resolved to do so. Obviously, some resistance from some of the landlocked states still, but that was a little bit more decisive than many expected. I guess whilst China is still grappling with its zero COVID policy and reinforcing that is the policy, it hasn't gotten worse. So those who feared that the pandemic would win and China would struggle haven't had their way, if you like. Obviously, terrible situation for citizens of Shanghai, entire parts of Beijing being told to stay and work from home as well. But it hasn't spiraled, it hasn't snowballed into something really dramatic, and therefore people have not worsened their demand loss projections from China for that. And then the news, the two headlines which couldn't have been more comically close to one another, of Fatih Birol saying IEA can release more oil than currently announced if necessary, and then Jennifer Granholm on behalf of the Biden administration stating that they were going to replenish 60 million barrels of US oil to put back a third of the 180 or so which they've pledged so far. So those were all kind of supportive. And meanwhile, the reality on the ground is that we have a view that there is increasing backing in of supplies from Russia, because we're now virtually on top of that date where the international banking system just cannot make payments to Russian entities work. EU sanctions, for example, prohibit a whole number of things from May 15th. And even those parties who have hitherto said that they have existing contractual obligations to fulfill, which would be in breach of law if they didn't take or pay terms or what have you, that is now a different reality. And it manifests itself, of course, in those economies which have the least purchasing power, which are seeing shortages. And those scenes, some of which have been put in your digest, for example, the Sri Lankan government coming under heavy internal criticism for not keeping petrol stations wet is one of many such manifestations.
Just to drill down a little bit into your China comments, still sounding bullish there about the outlook for China. It seems slightly contrarian to a lot of the headlines that are still, I mean, it was interesting. I was stick with my analogy of my little trip to Europe, coming back into Dubai airport last night. There was this strange mix of COVID realities. We had a lot of people with masks just dripping around their chins and flip-flops, and then you had Chinese, or it seemed Asian, in full hazmat suits, shields, face masks, coming from a very different reality. Your thoughts there on where China's outlook is, the inevitable acknowledgement that they're getting, at least even by their own news organizations, that it is a difficult period, but yet you don't seem to be indicating that there will be a big hit on their oil consumption. Just your thoughts on that more specifically.
No, there has clearly been a hit on the oil consumption in the transportation sector. There's no question about it. The Chinese tourist is virtually totally absent. Yes, I've been lucky enough to travel as well, and yes, the teams in full hazmat suits, I guess, Chinese delegations, sports teams, what have you, who will then face 3 weeks quarantine on their return. They're few and far between. The vast majority of Asians with face masks on will be Malaysian, Singaporean honeymooners, and people from other ASEAN countries, and obviously a smattering of Korean and Japanese. And therefore, that demand for the Chinese tourist, and more importantly, the Chinese business traveler, is just completely absent. I've got staff who are Beijing and Shanghai based, and it's a major undertaking for them to come on a business trip to Singapore. It's not just a question of 3 weeks in quarantine on return, and then a bit of a question mark over whether that will be extended courtesy of the Chinese administration, the provincial governments and the state government, but also whether they can actually get a slot to fly back, because there's a finite quota of seats also. So yes, we're clearly missing that segment, and it got, whilst the Chinese domestic aviation sector had recovered, that one's virtually wiped out as well. flights out of Hong Kong, for example, were down 88% in a statistic last week on pre-COVID numbers, which is telling you something. The comment I was making was that had you scrolled the clock back a week and taken a poll of experts, I think many would have predicted that we'd see more COVID cases. So China, not surprisingly, given the drastic steps they've taken, have managed to stem the spread of a virus that many think is inevitably going to take hold and run its course across everywhere in the world, regardless how much people try to lock things down. But so far, so good. And of course, as we all know, China reinforced its commitment to the policy. You had a rather interesting headline up on your digest, which has, by the way, been removed from the internet, from what I can see, on Chinese villagers in some remote rural location getting out the sticks and chasing away the enforcers from the provincial government. I mean, that's a nice little story, but maybe just illustrates the view that there should be some sort of public discontent. All of my staff in China are accepting of the policies. They understand the hardship. They observe and feed back to me that there are things like, it's tough to get hold of any food you wish. Delivery service, of course, is the only option. And prices have gone spiraling through the roof on the cost of acquiring certain staple foods, things like, dried noodles and instant noodle packs and that sort of stuff. But on the whole, everyone is being compliant and accepting of things. And the way that the economy is being kept running in certain parts is, companies have made provision for their staff to spend time at the workplace, and that means overnighting. And therefore, the companies are providing the food and the bedding and the creature comforts that are required, so people are literally able to keep making cars or keep making manufactured goods or running the financial sector of Shanghai.
Mike, your thoughts on that? Obviously, Vitol, one of the many companies in your peer group and in the upstream that have announced withdrawal from Russia, but yet Russian oil continues to get to the market. Your outlook for that to continue, despite the fact that many international companies are backing away, that Russian oil will continue to reach a destination, and that scale of 3 million barrels disruption that the IEA announced 2 or 3 months ago will indeed not happen. Your thoughts on the scale of the outlook for Russian disruption?
Yes, we'll just look at some numbers here. I mean, before the Ukraine invasion, Russia was producing at or above its quota, which is now 10.66 million barrels per day. And it was putting into its refining system something in the order of 5.7 million barrels per day. The market consensus would seem to be that both those numbers are down about 1 million barrels per day from there, which is, it's not insignificant, but it's a relative drop in the ocean compared to the intended impact of sanctions on Russia. If you add together what that means for net exports, historically, Russia was exporting a mix of roughly 2/3 crude, 1/3 products, totaling 7.7 million barrels a day. If only 1 million barrels a day of that has gone missing so far, before the EU shut the door on Russian crude, if they indeed succeed in getting unanimity over that, that is indeed not the intended consequence of the sanctions. If you go across the world, not many countries in Asia, I think close to 0 countries in Africa, not many in Latin America, have actually formally got sanctions against Russia. Many pieces of the world economy are sitting on the fence. And notably, the 2 biggest countries, population-wise in the world, are continuing to find ways of accessing Russian oil, India and China. But other
significant discounts.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah, of course.
And of course, the protagonists in those trades are changing, because it is not convenient to do what you would normally do if you want to ship Russian oil from the Baltic ports to Asia. You would normally put one of the biggest possible ship to get the best economies of scale. But the process of involving multiple ship owners and the associated insurance that needs to go with that, and the payment mechanisms, is likely to end up in delays and bottlenecks. And therefore, you're finding that an entire segment of the shipping market will need to be dedicated to this trade. And there are many, many words for it, but it's clearly not mainstream. And the oil trades at a discount and the ships will trade at a premium, because the ship owner that is engaging in this business may not find that his ships are going to be accepted by everybody else for some time to come. So this is a segment of trade which, of course, might be associated with the flows of oil from other sanctioned countries that have found their way into the Malaysian Straits and then onwards into Chinese markets over the years, with administrations that would be expected to impose sanctions turning a blind eye, if you like, or just not having the wherewithal to intervene. And there is a concern, of course, that this is going to become rather prominent. It's no surprise, perhaps, that India's been invited to join the G7 by Germany to attend those talks and be lent upon pretty hard, because for now, Indian refiners do seem to have the go-ahead from Delhi to continue buying arbitrage barrels, as one large Indian refiner referred to them.
Your thoughts, outlook going forward? At some point, the oil price and the market seem to be supported quite significantly by turmoil and uncertainty with Russia and Ukraine, less by economic growth and outlook of positive demand. Your thoughts on that, and that changing, that this economic outlook will, to the second half of the year, put a downward pressure on demand and prices?
Yes, I mean, just going back to what we observe, I mean, outside of China, the consumer wishes to spend and resume normal life. And as the masks come off around the world, even with relaxed terms across parts of Asia now, it's virtually impossible to get a flight, whether for holiday destination or for business travel. I mean, I'm waitlisted on 3 flights for the remainder of this month because there's no business class seat available. So people are flying in economy potentially. I think there's one thing pertaining to Russia, before I come back to your question, which needs to be highlighted also, and that is the speed with which the Germans have fast-tracked 2 and likely 4 regasification facilities to wean themselves off dependence on Russian gas and have the alternative to bring in marginal LNG from Qatar or the US or whatever it might be. And that itself, that's a result in the speed with which they've deployed, with one of their providers, Hug, assuring the Germans that they can have 2 of these units operational by the end of this year, which is phenomenally quick. That has served to lift gas prices in the US sentiment-wise. And of course, the rig counts in the US are up quite substantially, but Henry Hub trading at above $8 per MMBTU is quite something. And of course, I can't end this call without commenting on the fact that US gasoline prices as a nationwide average in the US are hitting $4.30 a gallon, which is close to record ever levels, with a friend telling me that he saw a pump price on a highway in Southern California at $7.30. Now, California is unique, of course. And we have to remind ourselves diesel is above that. And the reality is that there are very, very tight fundamentals in middle distillates. Diesel is not a commodity that's easy to come by. And there's very little space in the supply system for delays arising from cargoes running late, which typically happens when you have backwardation and inventories 35 million barrels below normal levels, and off-spec cargo situations also. So the system is pretty tight as far as oil is concerned. Maybe I'll ask.
We're coming out of a 2-year period in which OPEC Plus was the engine of oil market stability and the upward motion of the price. Obviously, pre-Ukraine, it was the determining factor to a great extent, the control of OPEC Plus supply and then the return of it. Your outlook for OPEC Plus at this point, what is their role in the market right now? They had a meeting last week. It seemed to be relatively irrelevant. Their current agreement expires in September, which is, of course, just around the corner. How do you look to OPEC Plus now and over the coming months of this year and its relevance for the market?
Yeah, most of OPEC Plus is maxed out. And again, one of the articles in your digest highlighted quite nicely that Nigeria has a quota of 1.7 something and is only outputting 1.4. Angola has a quota of 1.4, and the output is running at 1.1 or thereabouts. And these are largely assets that are operated by foreign companies in country. And these very foreign companies, of course, these super majors have been deploying their very, very depleted capital over the last 2 years on other things. So this is the issue. One of our attendees here, Ted's been putting up the corporate results for Shell, for example. It has been reporting season, and I mean, I think it's grossly unfair for the market to be critical of these results. They are a consequence of prices, both in terms of flat price for the upstream, but more importantly, in terms of the margins available in the products sphere and very, very nice refining margins. And the oil majors, or energy giants, as should we call them now, are fulfilling their promises to return money to shareholders by engaging in share buybacks. But those can now accelerate, and they're going to face the choice of deploying some of that P&L into resuming the spend, which has been woefully lacking in upstream production, or accelerating the turn away from fossil fuels into renewable greenhouse gas addressing issues, energy transition. And my sense is a lot of the money is going to go into that direction to accelerate that deployment, and it therefore leaves in the hands of others, namely national oil companies and private equity, the burden of restoring the investment, not just in US shale, but in some of the more challenging provinces. Because while some of those companies I mentioned would find it unacceptable to say that peak oil is still ahead of us, I think the vast consensus amongst consultants and people that can afford to say so is that we're still seeing oil demand grow, despite the hiatus in China, and that there's a huge question mark over who's going to invest in the marginal oil field, given that underlying decline is a pretty dramatic number if you don't invest in oil fields, and indeed the marginal refining capacity. And look at what a tight shipping market we have now as well, in order to satisfy peak demand, which is, in the opinion of those that can say so, still ahead of us. Yeah. So a lot of concern there. But in the eyes of OPEC Plus, they will continue as set out, adding 400 something thousand barrels per day per month to the market until the end of the agreement. But in reality, it's only those 2 or 3 countries that can still produce the extra. Saudi, the Emirates, and Kuwait, I guess, and Iraq has its own challenges in terms of meeting their phenomenal potential for production for technical reasons. Yeah.
Well, I'll just wrap on that point. Does the market, are market actors looking to OPEC Plus to continue to find consensus beyond September? Is it relevant? Is ultimately my question.
Unless we see massive demand destruction from a recession, or high prices destroying demand in places which don't have the purchasing power, the supply-demand, the spare supply cushion from OPEC will be at a point which is alarming. And it goes hand in hand then with a lower amount of strategic petroleum reserve in the SPR holding countries. So naturally, markets do what they do. They price in the fact that that has to be replenished, or that there is the risk of an event as yet unforeseen, causing major shortages in the rationing. So, of course, that's why there's upward bias in the price.